Good morning. It is a joy to be with you this morning. Welcome to those who are with us online. What a privilege it is to align our thoughts and our words to bring honor to the name of Jesus as we've been doing together this morning. I'm so happy that you get to be a part of that with us today. So here's something I want us to think about this morning. If Jesus really said and meant what we believe he said, and if Jesus really did what we believe that he did, then we have every reason to be resilient. We have every reason to be resilient. In fact, that word there, resilient, it's been on my mind a lot lately, and it's something that I want us to talk about this morning. I think it's something that we as a church could always use more of in our lives. And on a day like today, when we have our missions month that's approaching its conclusion, we have our trunk or treat that's planned for the parking lot. We're returning to community groups here soon and signing up for these things today and seeing these signs of renewal and growth continue to come to our church. I feel like this is a great time for us to be thinking about our calling as God's people, to be a resilient people. That is a call that we have as individuals of faith, and it's a call that we have as a church family, to be resilient. It actually reminds me of a story I heard recently about a young man named Chris. He's younger than I am. He's 22 years old, and about 1 year ago, in September, Chris accomplished something great. He ran an Ironman race. Actually, his accomplishment was historic. Chris was the first person with Down syndrome to complete the Ironman race. Now, if you haven't heard of the Ironman race before, it's a doozy. It's a 3-part race, otherwise known as a triathlon. It starts with a 2.4-mile swim. I think I might drown. And then you hop out of the pool, and you go for a little bike ride for a while, like 112 miles of biking. Basically from here to Waco, you bike. And then that is you hop off of the bike and you have now reached the starting line of a marathon, which sounds like challenge enough on its own. 26.2 miles of running after all of that they've done before. At events like these, there's a cutoff time. For this particular one that Chris was doing, the time was 17 hours to complete all this swimming and biking and running. No exceptions to that rule. And Chris here needed no exceptions. With 14 minutes to spare, he came across the finish line wearing a t-shirt. I don't know if you can read that there in the picture. You see what that says on the t-shirt? It says 1% better. 1% better. Now, if you were hoping that I would give you a definition for that word a moment ago, resilient, there's your definition right there. Resilience is a word for facing difficult circumstances in life. It's for what you do when you fall down, if you're able to get back up again. And resilience is that thing in our lives that helps us to be 1% better each and every day. And that's what our friend Chris here set out to do. To get ready for this marathon, this Ironman, it took 3 years of training. And when he started, he was 18 years old, having never done any physical exercise in his life. His first day of training was one single push-up. And 3 years later, he was making a speech on national TV after doing this and saying this. People ask, how do I overcome so many obstacles? Easy. I just get 1% better every day. 3 years ago, I was 18, overweight, out of shape, excluded and isolated. My dream was to be like you, to be included, to be independent. When I started, this was all about a boy and his dream, but now it's so much more. Now I want to honor God by being the best I can be and give hope to others. And I do that by getting 1% better every day. One last thing he said, you just need to hear. It's easy to make excuses and quit. I don't do excuses and I don't quit. People ask, why don't you quit? Because my dream is bigger than my pain. How about that for a speech? Clearly there's a lot to like about what Chris is saying here. You know, one of the things that I like about what he just said is that he talked in his speech about wanting to be like you and me. And as I think about what he does, what he says here, can't you see how true that is and always has been? There might be some things in Chris's life that he might not be able to do on his own. Some things that he might need someone's help with, which makes him a lot like you and me. But also there are some things that no one can do for Chris, that only he can bring to the table and bring every day. And that thing that he brings to the table every day and that he needs to grow and get better 1% every day, that's the thing we're talking about today. It's the thing that we need in our church and in our lives of faith. It's the thing that we find in the story of a man in the Old Testament named Nehemiah. Would you get out a Bible and turn there? A book of your Old Testament called Nehemiah. Chronologically speaking, this is kind of actually getting pretty close relatively speaking, to the time when Jesus comes. It's one of the last things that happens chronologically before the coming of our Messiah. And as we open up Nehemiah's story today, I want us to think about how he and our friend Chris from a moment ago have some things in common. Because in both of them, I think we see this powerful example of what it means to be resilient. Now, just think for a minute what we know of Nehemiah's story, if you can recall his story. And if not, here's some things you're going to want to know about it. Start with this. Nehemiah has something that every resilient person needs. You know what that is? Something every resilient person needs is a problem. Because there's no such thing as resilience without a problem, without a challenge, without a hill to climb. And thankfully in our lives, we don't have to look far to find those in our own lives. Well, Nehemiah had one too. Nehemiah has a problem. You know what it is? He is a man of the Jewish faith and people, but he's not living in his homeland. Nehemiah has been taken away from his homeland into exile, probably before he was even born. This happened to his family. Meanwhile, his homeland is not in good shape. Someone comes at the start of Nehemiah chapter 1 and brings word about life back home to Nehemiah, long far away in Persia. And they say this about their homeland: things are not good. The people who survived there are in great trouble and shame, and the walls of Jerusalem have been burned with fire. Their gates have been destroyed, and this means that God's people back home are unprotected, unproductive, and ashamed until somebody steps in and does something about it. And Nehemiah hears these words, and he believes that he is the person who can step in and help lead the response to this problem. So that is Nehemiah's problem. Pretty big one. You might hear about Nehemiah's problem and think that nothing could be further from the kinds of things that I'm dealing with in my life. I mean, imagine leading an ancient people across 1,000 miles just to bring them to build up the walls of a city. Like, that's not the kind of thing we deal with. But if we think about what Nehemiah is really going through here, maybe we find that it's actually a little bit more relatable than we think. I wonder if you've ever faced a problem like this before. You ever faced a problem that couldn't be fixed in a day? One that couldn't be fixed in a month or even a year? Our friend Chris took 3 years to change his story. How long does it take for Nehemiah? That depends on how you count it, I guess. Did you know that after Nehemiah hears the word about what's going on in Jerusalem, he doesn't even do anything for 5 whole months? That's not the right way to put that. Nehemiah does one thing for 5 whole months. When he hears the word about Jerusalem, he prays to God for 5 months. He hears the word about this in the Jewish month of Kislev. It's easy to just kind of skip over this because I don't know the Jewish month of Kislev. It's like October or November. He hears the news of what has happened. And as soon as he heard the words, he sits down and he prays. It says he continually fasts and prays. He hears this prayer and it starts a pattern. He prays day and night before the Lord. That was Kislev, October, November. He prays and he prays and he prays for 5 months until Nisan, there's a word we recognize, March and April of the following year. 5 whole months he prays. This is the kind of problem that takes 5 whole months before you even lift a finger to face it. Not a quick fix going on here. So then Nehemiah goes to the king. He gets the approval to go on to fix the wall. And then he's got that journey I mentioned a moment ago. The passage doesn't even tell us how long this takes. I don't know. But how long would it take you to lead hundreds of people on what I read was a literal 1,000-mile journey from Persia to Jerusalem? And it's just a verse in our story. But it's not just a verse to Nehemiah. This is not a quick fix problem. Then they get there and the work is waiting for them. They start the work of construction. This part is actually astoundingly fast. They finish the walls, if you can believe it, in 52 days. Isn't that quite incredible? I remember how long it took to fix 820. Maybe we can get some of these guys up here to do some of that work. But that 52 days is a little bit deceiving, right? Think about it as 52 days, working night and day, as if you're in a foxhole in a war zone. Part of Nehemiah says that things got so bad around them with their enemies, just licking their chops to find them in a moment of weakness, that the folks who are building the walls are working with one hand and never setting down the sword or the spear that is in their other hand the whole time that they work all day. That's how serious it is. Can you imagine the strain that makes to spend 2 whole months, night and day, in that kind of environment? The stress of that. That doesn't go by real quick. And even when they finish the wall in 52 days, the work is not done. The whole rest of the story is a rebuilding story, but it's Nehemiah rebuilding the people in those walls. We know he does this for at least 12 years. That's when the book ends. But the story continues from there. What I'm saying is if you've ever had a problem that wasn't a quick fix problem, you can relate with what Nehemiah is going through here. And how about this? Have you ever inherited a problem that was bigger than you? Or one that the solution to it was going to need more than just you? This is Nehemiah's problem too. So Nehemiah has this burden on his heart to rebuild the wall. But what did Nehemiah have to do with the falling of the wall? In his words, he had some to do with it. He talks often in his prayers about the sin of his people. He always uses the word we. He's very clear about this. He says, we have sinned against you. I and my family have sinned. We have offended you deeply. He takes ownership and responsibility for this problem, even though very likely he was born in exile, born after Jerusalem fell. So some of this was the mess he inherited. Some of it was long before him. And as much as he might like to go back in time and change those things, he can't do that any more than we can do that in our lives either. And the solution to this problem is every bit as big. And it needs more than just Nehemiah. He's going to need hundreds of people to lend their hands to the rebuilding of this wall. He's going to need the approval of a foreign, idolatrous king to even let them go. And he's not even allowed to ask this king for help, though he does it anyway. He needs help from other people. Most of all, he needs help from God, who's going to protect them from their enemies. And Nehemiah gets all this help in the end. But not before he's dealt with this last thing also. If you ever had a problem in life that you could hope and pray and have faith about, but you did not know how it was going to go. Nehemiah is a man of faith. I think it is still a problem like that he's facing. There are some differences between Nehemiah and someone like Abraham, for example. Talked about Abraham a little bit at the start of class this morning in here. At several points in Abraham's life, God tells him before he faces something, speaks to him and says, now you're going to face something. Here's what you're going to do. This is how this is going to turn out. Nehemiah prays, and he prays for 5 months. He prays about this problem. He has a sense in his heart that God has called him to follow this and answer the call. There is no burning bush, no talking donkey, no thundering voice from heaven that we know of. Nehemiah is like us in that way, answering the call in faith, but without some of those clear, unmissable guarantees that we read about elsewhere in the Old Testament. Nehemiah doesn't seem to have that. And what I've just described to you are some real and pressing challenges, right? Here are some hills to climb. Something that can't be fixed in a day, something that you can't fix yourself and that may not have caused just by yourself, something that you can't go back in time and rewrite the story, something that you can't see that far ahead to know how it's going to turn out. These are Nehemiah's challenges. Aren't these our challenges too? So right now it's Missions Month. We've been hearing hopeful reports and exciting news about great opportunities and great successes in the things that God is doing in this world, and hopes for things that God may do in the future. We have all that hope in us. At the very same time, we also know that this work is not easy work. Whether it's the work of God around the world or the work of God right here in this place. The growth of God's kingdom, the accomplishment of God's mission does not happen in a day or in a month, even in a year. And sometimes we might see something like that, the work to be done, and it might feel daunting. It can be discouraging. I mentioned earlier we have many exciting things that are happening right now at College Hill. I was telling somebody this month how excited I was that in one single calendar month, we had a park night, a youth retreat, a trunk or treat, Fifth Sunday Fellowship coming up, Wednesday Fest on Wednesday nights. First week of next month, we're having community groups starting up again. And like all of these things that finally we've been waiting for are coming together all at one time. And this rush, this influx of relationship and fellowship with one another. It's so exciting. Every single one of those things also is a challenge, too. Every single one of those things requires the church to step up, and it takes energy to get things back going again. I look and I see so many of our members who have carried an extra load for many months leading up to this season. It is almost like going that 1,000-mile journey just to get to the starting line of the work to be done. It's like doing all that biking just to get to the starting line of a marathon, and it could be tiring. It can be overwhelming. In our own lives of faith, we know the hills we struggle to climb. Our struggles with sin, those cycles of habits and discouragement and fear and disengagement. And when you get disengaged, it's hard to get re-engaged again. It's tough. In our lives, we sometimes deal with relationships that get strained, and that's tough. Because those are usually not just one person's problem. And very often, they're not just one person's solution either. I say all of this to say that we know some of what Nehemiah is dealing with here. We know it because we've shared in these challenges too. We stand in the crowd with everybody else as Nehemiah stands up and he says, "You see the trouble we are in." And I invite you today to just think about, great or small, whatever that trouble that presses on your heart might be. You see the trouble we are in, Nehemiah says. And maybe we do. The question is, how are we going to see those challenges? Are we going to see the challenges we face as pain that is greater than our dream? Or do we see them as something that could make us, shape us, and transform us? Do we see these hills to climb in our lives, in your life, as something that discourages us from trying? Or is it a crossroads of resilience? A chance to be resilient? Can we bring to the challenge in our life what our friend Chris brings, 1% better every day, that goal? What our friend Nehemiah brings, 1 brick in this hand and 1 brick in the other, 1 brick at a time. You see the trouble we are in, Nehemiah says. I invite you to think about what that might be for us, but do not stop there. I want you to hear this next part too. Nehemiah doesn't stop there. He says, "Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be in disgrace." And with these words, Nehemiah declares a path. He chooses the path of resilience. He chooses to stand up and be resilient in the face of those mountains to climb. And when he says that to the crowd that is like us and sees the same things, they say 4 words back to him. You know what they say? Let us rebuild together. Let's rebuild together. When I think about the life of faith today, not just here, but in every place, there are very few words that I would want to impress on people's souls more than those 4 words right there. Let us rebuild together. Because those are resilience words. And in the life of faith, there is never a time when we don't need resilience. I think those are words we need right now. We always need them, but we need them now. Today I want to call you to that. Could it be that something you're facing in your life might need a little more resilience in your heart? Could you bring that to the table as you face that challenge today? Now, I'm not saying that every spiritual challenge we face we can muscle our way to a solution with the strength of our will. I'm not saying that. Like Nehemiah, we need God's help. We need the help of one another. Many things we cannot accomplish alone. Many things we cannot accomplish in a day. But one thing we can bring to the table, no matter what the challenge is this mindset. Press on and bring resilience in our hearts. Next week, we're going to be turning to another place in Scripture. We're going to be turning to the life of the early church. And I think that we're going to find that this resilience is a driving force in how God uses his church for his glory. But today I want to just simply ask you to consider with your own life, is resilience something that I need right now? And is it something that I can seek in my life right now? And if that's what you're feeling today, let me simply say, if Jesus really said what we believe he said, and if Jesus really did what we believe that he did, we have every reason to believe that our dream is in fact bigger than our pain. Our hope in Jesus is in fact reason to be resilient. Talks about how our present sufferings are not worth comparing for the glory to be revealed in us. We can take each day, like our friend Chris here, as an opportunity to honor God by being the best that we can be, and in a way that gives hope to others. Maybe that's something you need to hear today. Maybe we can help to encourage you toward that resilience today through the prayers of your brothers and sisters, by working together on that journey together. Maybe for someone you need to respond to the gospel today and make a resolve in your life. Maybe that's the hill you need to climb, the one you know you've needed to climb, the one where you put on Christ in baptism. Make that decision. However you may be called or challenged, I invite you to respond with your hearts while we stand and while we sing.